This morning. Here we are again, another day, another webinar, no doubt the third or fourth that you've been invited to this week. So hopefully you'll have come to realise that our approach is always a little bit different. So what we're going to take you through this morning is hopefully some interesting content, and then we're going to look at a few free things that you could be doing right now. Now, when it comes to this whole subject of remote working, we've looked at things through two very, very distinct lenses. First off, lens number one is typically the one that's concerned around the systems at the core of businesses, you know, the firewalls, the network access control, those exciting, sexy things that, you know, we in security absolutely love. Now, we've covered this in a number of webinars over the lockdown period. So if you want to go and access to those recordings, just let me know and I can go and point you in the right direction. But the second lens, and the one that we're going to cover today, looks into security from a user's perspective. And it's often these users that really get overlooked. These are the people that, you know, they're at the center of our business. And unfortunately, they're usually the ones who are the source of most of the problems. You know, business would be absolutely fantastic and easy if it wasn't for our users. And that was when people were working in the office. But now that they're working remotely, the problem gets even more of a problem. So it goes without saying, thanks very much for your time this morning. Apologies for the overrun, but James and I really appreciate it. So who have we got on the panel today? Well, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Richard Page. I'm one of the directors here at AN Security. And the reason I've been asked to chair this session today is to talk briefly about my experience around one of the key disciplines which needs to be really considered around security and making sure that it's rolled out to users, and that's user experience. But I'm just an appetizer for the real star of the show today. Hopefully, my colleague James is on the line. James, can you introduce yourself? James, can you hear me? I don't think you can do, right. So we're going to just crack on. But James is, he's been running our secure remote working webinar since the start of pandemic this year. And many of you have had the pleasure of working with him previously. So let me just crack on here. So what are we going to cover today? Now, clearly, we're all veterans at home working, and the majority of us have been doing this since March this year. But none of this was planned in. Everything pretty much happened overnight. So what we want to do is go and take a look at what we've learned over the past few months. What are the new risks that our users have been bringing to us in order to challenge us? We're then going to go and start looking at the importance of user experience. How easy is it to use something that's got a direct correlation with adoption levels? You know, user experience is something that's been around for a huge amount of time, you know, in application development and web development circles. And there's loads and loads and loads we can learn about this discipline in order to go and make sure that we embed this in the way of working for every single one of our users. So hopefully we'll have impressed on you the importance of user experience. And then James, if we can go and get him connected, is going to talk you through some really cool stuff that you really might want to consider when we're talking about elevating that user experience. And as in the previous sessions, you know, we know that times are tough at the moment, so we work with the vendor community to do the best that we can do to come up with some ideas and suggestions of things that you can action now that will cost you absolutely nothing. And finally, if we've not waffled on too much, there should be some time for some questions. And when it comes to questions, you've got two options. If you want your question to be anonymous, then feel free to drop me a line, our page at ansecurity.com. I'm going to be monitoring this inbox throughout the session. Or secondly, if you're happy to see everyone to see your question, then you can use the Q&A function in the Zoom console. So there have been a total of 254 days since Boris told us that we all had to pack our bags and start working from home. And home working is essentially the way that we do things now. And as we discussed in the last session, the majority of staff and businesses seem to really quite like this new setup. And that suggests it's something that's going to stay into the future. You know, businesses are happy, their staff are more productive and their overheads are lower, and that's great news. But staff are also happier as well. You know, they've got a better work-life balance, and in many instances, they're much better off because they've got a reduced cost, because they got rid of the cost of commuting. But, you know, not everything is rosy when it comes to secure remote working. And there's loads that we can do as a profession that we can learn from the last 254 days just so that we can go and make sure that our staff are effective and productive at home. So what I want to do is I just want to dip into a few interesting use cases, things that have emerged since March last year that if we'd have been aware of, that have absolutely had an impact on our security approach. So the first one is home Wi-Fi. And I think if we were to do a show of hands to try and find out how many of you systematically ask any questions about the router use by your home workers, the chances are that it's going to be a big fat zero. And you know, honestly, why would you? Well, there's some good reason really. A typical home user, you know, doesn't have the same mindset as a cybersecurity professional. And a staggering 94% of home users still use those factory default settings that are enabled on their home Wi-Fi routers. Now, clearly, that makes them a real source of interest even for the most casual threat actor. And I'm not suggesting you do this, but if you were to go and start digging into the world of consumer-based Wi-Fi, it's really quite interesting what you find out. And if there was a highly likely list, I would definitely go and put a direct attack on the router as being on there. So we take all the way back to April, and the impact of the pandemic was really started to kick in. The threat actors were very active. And Linksys, there was an organization called Linksys who they're a vendor, manufacturer of home hardware for Wi-Fi. I think they're part of the Belkin group. And they had to go and reset all of their customers' Wi-Fi account passwords after a gang managed to go and take control of the devices and redirect users to COVID-themed malware. And you can kind of guess where this story is going. The gang are after financial gain, they're pawning routers through cred stuffing attacks. It's an absolute nightmare. Now, I'm not specifically picking on Linksys here. There are a number of examples that we could have picked from, you know, a whole bunch of other router manufacturers. You know, these attacks are really quite well considered. They're targeting a user that is significantly less sophisticated and capable than your typical IT department. And you know what that means is they generally go on without anybody knowing about it. And that's got an impact on us within the cybersecurity team and consequently the overall health of our business. But these attacks, they're pretty simple, which means that they're more than likely going to be around for the foreseeable future. But you know what, in most instances here, we think, don't worry, you know, the vendor has absolutely got this in control. They're going to patch it up, source it all out, no issues. Well, you know, when we look at these instances here, that's probably not the case. There's many parts of the supply chain that don't really seem to be that interested in improving the security of these commodity components, such as home Wi-Fi routers. And if we go back to May this year, we in the cyber community were aware of threat actors using this WPS feature in the TalkTalk super router in order to go and steal the gateway wireless network passwords. So basically, if you're near a TalkTalk super router, you can go and probe it for the Wi-Fi password via this dodgy WPS feature, and then hop onto the wireless, do all sorts of damage. And the company in question here, they were aware of this around about 2014. And you know, they've done nothing 6 years later. The cyber community are aware of this, the threat actors are aware of this. So the choice of router that your staff has can have a direct impact to your overall security posture. And that kind of suggests that that's something that you need to be aware of. So I just want to talk about data theft, and this is always an interesting one. When I was researching this subject, it really kind of dawned on me the lengths that the criminal community will go to for financial gain. And I've got to say that one of the things that I never really considered was home burglary. But there's been a number of cases where gangs have actually physically broken into homes in order to go and steal corporate devices. But when you look at the evidence, there's some real clear logic as to why they do this. You know, first off, think about the market value of those corporate devices you've got. You know, the work laptop, the value is not actually in the physical kit, it's in the data that's stored on it. A single corporate device in the right hand has got the potential return to the criminal in the range of around about 35 times that of a normal house-to-house burglary. You can understand why these are the things that they're trying to steal when they're breaking into people's houses. The second point to take into consideration is effort. You know, a criminal is pretty much the same as any normal businessman. statistically, they're going to go and spend their time where they can go and get the greatest return for the least effort. And it's actually statistically easier to go and break into a home where the work device is physically present than it is to hack into a corporate office environment. And you know what? There's a lower cost to entry as well. The cost of a crowbar is a heck of a lot cheaper than going and buying the required IT solutions and high-end PCs that you need to go and have major cybercrime. But there's lots of real world stories out there that we all need to be worried about, typically in the big cities where gangs are going around, and they're still doing it now, posing as NHS test workers, testing people for coronavirus in order to go and access to their homes. And this is nothing new. We've seen this previously with gas and electricity meter workers, but they were focusing on the elderly and the vulnerable. But the interesting thing here, and what's changed, is that's not who they were after. They were after the office worker. But, what does that actually mean for us and our users? As a business, do you actually provide any guidance as to how users should work with their corporate devices when they're working in their own homes? And if you do, how do you actually go and police that? What are the implications of the theft of a work laptop or a confidential set of documents? Are all remote worker laptops encrypted? It's really surprising what we find about the volume of devices that somehow slip through the net, and that's a risk to your business. Are remote workers' homes given a similar security consideration as the corporate infrastructure? Because you really need to go and have that mindset. In security terms, your employee homes are actually an extension of your physical office real estate. Okay, so I want to touch upon what we're calling unauthorized family access. And, quite honestly, I put this right at the top of the list of things we didn't even think about when we sent our staff home. Unauthorized family access is exactly as it sounds. And having a corporate device at home opens up so many areas of risk that we didn't have previously. It could be something really simple, innocent, such as children using a laptop for a Zoom-based social club in an evening. Or at the other end of the scale, it could be something, a bit nasty, a malicious family member who's sneakily trying to get onto a corporate device in order to gain access to some information for some sort of nasty, malicious reason. But you've also got to think about these other sorts of cases as well. What about printed data? In my own household, I found some printed data that wasn't sensitive, but it would actually made its way into the recycling bin following an end-of-day cleanup. These things do happen. And as you listen to this, you're probably thinking that, these are all rare edge cases, but unfortunately, it's not the case. They're very, very common and it's easy to happen. So where does the risk lie? It's a bit of a grey area, but to a certain degree, whichever way we look at it, it lies on us within the security team. But the one thing that the first round of COVID that's taught us, and this is consistent across the majority of organisations that we work with, is this whole matter of unauthorised family access has been overlooked. However, when we look at the impact on the business and the fact that it could be so significant, we really need to go and make sure we keep a lid on it. So you need to think about the legal impact. If you just do a quick Google search, there are loads and loads of instances of lawsuits from individuals who've had their data leaked as a direct result of lax processes whilst working within the home. But that pales into insignificance in terms of both the impact and regularity of malware being downloaded by children who are using work devices for schoolwork. But the one that really gets me, and the one I think we all need to be concerned about, is this reputational impact. Can you imagine the embarrassment for an organisation if we've got to go to the ICO and get them involved if a personal machine is left unattended and a family member uses it to access non-public data? That's got Daily Mail headlines written all over it and it's got significant risk to our business. So, BYOD. The thing that you've got with an IT managed device is that you can pretty much guarantee that you are always going to have legitimate versions of the software on it. However, with personally owned devices, there is a real high chance that there's going to be some sort of malicious malware that's hiding there. But who's got control of that device? It's not owned or managed by the business. And who's going to be at fault if a staff member uses an untrusted personal machine to log to business resources? and then there's some sort of password theft. There's loads of simple solutions around this, and James is going to touch upon multi-factor authentication. That's going to block these kind of attacks really easily. But the learning that we've got from the first round of COVID is that we all need to really rethink our BYOD strategy, particularly as people start to drift back into the physical office environment over the coming months. We really don't want them bringing those nasties back onto our network when they do. I need to touch upon, the insider threat. Insider threat is nothing that's new, but what COVID has taught us is that this threat has evolved. And those of you who follow the cybersecurity press will have probably read about these things called leaky AWS3 buckets. And, in the really simplest form, what we're talking about here is staff taking company IP, company intellectual property. It could be data, it could be financial information, it could be, customer lists and that sort of stuff, uploading it into cloud services. But these cloud services don't have the correct security measures applied to them. In some instances, they don't have any security at all. So the threat actors, they're able to go and monitor this traffic, and then bam, they've got sensitive information that can be downloaded, sold, bartered, whatever you need to do with it in order to financially gain from it, you've got that problem. And if you've got the time, I'd recommend going and having a look on the Register website, because there's some really interesting articles about these leaky AWS3 buckets. But this is something that affects every organisation, irrespective of how well a business is performing. This insider threat now comes from, essentially the paranoid employee, somebody who's basically fearful of their job. By uploading data to cloud services, they're creating a significant risk to your business. So what we've got to do is really got to go and think about our DLP strategy. But, the most important thing that we've learned from the pandemic so far is this importance of user experience. And, quite simply, if you are a rank and file member of any company, you don't start the day immediately thinking about security. Why would you? But poorly considered and badly implemented solutions mean that when it comes to security, if a process is too confusing or too complicated or too slow, people will immediately begin to go and find a way around it. They just want to go and get on with their busy day. And the very fact of the matter is your customers and your users, they care a heck of a lot more about their to-do list than the need to go and follow our rigid, cumbersome security processes. And I can't stress this enough. User experience has got to be the central focus of any security initiative that we do. So what I want to do is I just want to spend a few minutes of things that we've gleaned from other sectors, such as website development, app development, where user experience is essential, because there's a lot that we can learn in order to make sure that we embed high levels of user experience within the minds and working practices of all of our users. But, the first thing you need to do is you need to go and make sure that user experience is first and foremost at the start of any security initiative you do. And that sounds absolutely obvious. But, when our consultancy teams go around and do postmortems on projects that clients have undertaken themselves that have gone a little bit wonky, invariably bad user experience is probably one of the common underlying causes. And I think as a group of people, we really sometimes treat our users quite harshly. But it's probably unfair, because few users are knowingly going to go and put the company at risk. And it's probably our responsibility as security professionals to, to move heaven and earth to go and make sure that we can help those users carry out their jobs whilst keeping them and our businesses productive and safe. But when it comes to user experience, it's not natural for us. In security, we're pretty much left brain thinkers. We're really, really, really great with logic. But user experience requires us to really start using that right side of our brain, the creative bit. Now, we're not talking about turning ourselves into, advertising executives or anything like that, but we really do need to start thinking differently. And that's difficult, if that's not how the brain works. So the question is how do we turn these logical brains into creative ones? And we do that in a way that is natural for us. We go and treat the whole subject of user experience as a logical, evidence-based project. And that's where we start. Let's go and get the evidence. Let's go and ask our users, invest in user research right from the very, very start of the project. It's quite easy to do, because if you go and get 5 disparate users from across your organization and you ask them the same questions about how they would like to interact with an existing solution in order to improve their experience, statistically, you're going to go and get around about 95% of the information that you need. Actually, you need to go and ask a heck of a lot more users if you want to improve on that. It's around about 40 people if you want to go and get a more useful value. So the question here is well, it's not the question, the point to take away from this is actually you can learn a heck of a lot from your users just by getting a really small sample size. So if you're ever thinking of running any sort of proof of concept, any sort of proof of value exercise, then don't just make this an IT project. Get your users involved from the start. And the best advice that I can give around user research is make it difficult for yourself. Pick those who are going to be the difficult users, because they're the ones who are going to provide the valuable insight, but they're also the ones that consume your time if things do go wrong. But, you know, user research is kind of irrelevant if you're asking them the wrong things. So what you've got to think about is, what are the points of friction? You know, good security projects consider actual users at the moment of friction in the workplace. So, you know, think about where that friction might lie within your workplace. If your business has got a bunch of salespeople who are busily running between meetings, you know, they're always late, they're generally administratively sloppy, then the friction might be around the short amount of time that they have at the start of a meeting in order to go and review their notes. So if you've gone and created a system and a process that puts them through, you know, a lengthy credentials refresh process, then you've created a problem. And generally, where you've done that, this is where stress will 100% override security sense. The user is going to be manically trying to find a way around the security process so they can get on your work, get on with their work. They've already injected a problem into your day now. But, you know, best practice security is as much about how users behave as it is about technology. And James is going to touch upon this a little bit later on, but alongside implementing security technology and processes that are designed with the user in mind, we've also got to start thinking about how we can ingrain cybersecurity as a normal part of employee behaviour. Yeah, this can involve anything from workshops to training, to sticking posters on the back of toilet doors, to regular emails. It's all part of that whole user experience. It's got nothing at all to do with technology. You know, and if this importance is continually reinforced to our users in a non-threatening manner, then you know what, funnily enough, you start to build a culture which recognises the importance of cybersecurity and reduces the organisational threat as a result. And when our guys are on site and they're doing floor walking across various different organisations, you can immediately tell the organisation that embraces cybersecurity and has a low threat risk as a result, or those which actually it's not important at all and people are just doing things in any which way that they want to. Those are the ones that generally have the issue. But managing expectations is really, really, really important. You know, even the most thoughtful and accessible security solutions are sometimes going to go and create additional moments of friction. You know, things that we're now asking the users to do that they never had to with the old way of working. So, you know, when there is unavoidable delay, which there will be, you know, due to any additional actions or, you know, the occasional downtime, you just got to be transparent. You know, like it says on the slide, keep the users informed. If you've got service delivery issues, make sure people know about it. If you know whether a service is going to be interrupted for 2 minutes or 2 hours, that's going to help reduce the level of frustration. But more importantly, it's going to avoid them starting to find ways around the process that you've so carefully crafted for them. But my final point when it comes to UX is simplicity. Simplicity is always the key to success when it comes to great experience and the high levels of adoption that come as a result of that. Yeah, the larger and more involved an IT solution is, the more issues there's likely to be. And that is 100% the case with security systems. You know, if you create something that's overly complicated, you're creating more issues for the users, you're creating more issues for yourself as well, because it's going to be more difficult and expensive to roll out and maintain. However, you know, sometimes it's really exciting to go and look at, you know, the latest and greatest shiny new technology that's out there that's going to go and immediately solve these new emerging threats. You know, we all like doing that, but you've really got to go and make sure that you consider how it's going to coexist in not just your security architecture, but also the experience of your user. It is equally as important. So we could run hours of webinars purely on the subject of user experience in security projects, but hopefully these few simple tips that we've put together have been some level of help. If you've got any questions on this, then feel free to fire them through to me. But what I'm going to do now, hopefully, is hand you over to James, and he's going to provide you with some interesting insight as to how we can really start to elevate those user experience. So, James, if I just stop sharing, hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, thank you very much, Rich. Right, so starting out with that user experience, our first stage is really about getting the right training into the hands of our users. And when we say user awareness training, a lot of organizations in a security context will start thinking about phishing simulation, of course, but this is only one small aspect of that. So what I would ask you to do is to go and take that 5-user sample that Rich has mentioned, have a look at how would the users handle a standard phishing email. Would it be a case of they look to immediately delete that email? Would it be a case of perhaps they're going to engage with that message? Or equally so, if you've given the user access to tools which allows them to forward this message in a manner that you can get useful information from, of course, into a help desk or into a ticketing system, is that the route that they would take as well? Now, for the longest time as well, phishing has been absolutely rife, and we've seen a new evolution of that in the standard CEO fraud email. So something typically along the lines of your managing director, your head of finance gets in touch and says, hey, can you arrange this large financial transaction to go ahead? And again, this is an opportunity to engage with the users and ask, what would you do in these instances? Have we provided sufficient training to you such that you can handle these situations? Now, when thinking about authentication, 2 aspects that have really come into their own recently, of course, are credential theft and also a new style of attack called MFA bypass. Now, in the credential theft attacks, again, we've got the situation where the user is perhaps engaged with a phishing email, perhaps engaged with some kind of a website where they're asked for those credentials. And this is our opportunity to ask the user that if they did this, what are their next steps if they later became aware that this was something malicious? When it comes to those MFA bypass attacks, we've seen instances very recently where organizations have gone and set up MFA, be that with push notifications, a text message, or a TOTP key, for instance, but the user still has their credentials phished in some manner. And of course, when a threat actor then reaches the website, reaches the login prompts, they've got these valid credentials, they go and butt up against that MFA prompt. This is the opportunity now where we've seen threat actors actually go and call the user, get in touch with the user. And of course, a lot of this information might be available through LinkedIn profiles or other dumps of data out there on the internet, and asks them for the TOTP key, asks them for the prompt that they've just seen on their mobile phone for them to press accept. And we've actually got a new form of authentication technology, which we're going to have a look at later in this presentation, which can actually stop these kinds of attacks. And the final aspect there, really touching on this notion of home users' routers becoming compromised, of course, is broken TLS screens, similar to the one that you can see in the screenshot on the right-hand side there. So in these situations, if the home user's wireless router has become compromised, a typical attack, again, a very low-level attack, but one that's very easy to accomplish on properly compromised routers, is to start to man in the middle that traffic. And again, we ask you to go to your users, and if they were to see a screen like this, what are their options? Are they going to ignore that? Are they going to report it to IT? What's their action going to be? And of course, we've seen a couple of organizations, not recent history, quite fortunately enough, but certainly in the past years, where they've actually deployed services that were protected by TLS inside their networks. And their response to these screens has been to tell users to go and click on advanced, to go and click the bypass, the continue prompt. So again, we ask, would the users take that step, go and engage with them, go and ask them these questions? Now, looking on the call today, I actually see a couple of organizations that should be absolutely prime place to do this, is have a think about how you're actually going to deliver any training that you are looking for your users to adopt as part of a multimedia strategy. And this is really where it comes into engaging with your own marketing departments, looking at a bit of an introspective analysis to get useful training out there to your users. And we've got the absolute utmost respect for the SANS Institute, of course, and they've got a series of both Word document PDFs and multimedia packages, which you can use to educate your users as a very nice and simple starting point. And if it really does come down to putting posters up on the inside of the toilet doors, that's certainly one way of going and handling these situations. And of course, the final aspect to it as well is making sure that you are tracking your engagements with your users and their user awareness training. If you suddenly realize that the users are completely filtering out the emails that you might be sending, are there other options for you to go and engage with those users? Make sure you target them just as much as the threat actors might be targeting them as well. Now, when it comes to the adoption of SaaS services, a lot of them are all about sharing documents, sharing tools and information. And of course, at the very beginning of the pandemic, the very beginning of the instruction for everyone to go home, a lot of organizations very rapidly were adopting SaaS services for document sharing. So the example I've got here, of course, is Microsoft SharePoint with OneDrive. And in this instance, perhaps I've got a manual and it's very easy for me to click a couple of links and enable that user to go and share that information with absolutely anyone via a link, via a custom URL. And of course, this manual might be of a low sensitivity, but very quickly things can escalate and we go from manuals to confidential or sensitive information like SSH keys, company secrets, or even special category data. And again, it can be very easy for the users to share this information. And this has come about because a lot of these online services at the default and out of the box settings have the most permissive options enabled. So in this instance, if you were to go and subscribe for Office 365 right now and set up a brand new tenancy, and if you were to hop into the SharePoint Admin Center and go over to the sharing screen there, you would see these sets of settings. You would see that any user inside your environment can share with anyone on the internet any information inside your SharePoint and OneDrive storage options. And of course, if you haven't already checked this screen out, if you haven't already hopped into there, I do encourage you at the end of this presentation to go and have a check on this, go and see what that setting is set to and have a consideration inside the organization of should we be changing this. Now, of course, from the IT perspective of let's turn off the ability for our users to have their data compromised, let's ramp these permissions all the way down to the bottom. But the reality is a lot of organizations, and again, I see some on the call that this would be very relevant for, have to have the ability to share information, be that with general users on the internet, or perhaps with specific guests, specific users that have been set up with guest accounts. So how do we go about enabling this for our users? How do we enable safe sharing such that the wrong information doesn't make it into the hands of threat actors? And we've now seen the rise in particular with, again, document sharing services, where we can actually reach into that information and grab out dashboards similar to the one that we see here, where we can identify the bulk transfer of financial information, the bulk transfer of perhaps legal and healthcare information, and flag that up to the administrators. The same also applies for detecting malware inside those files. So although a lot of SaaS services will have a small element of malware detection built into any of the files that are uploaded to them, of course, we do see those that haven't invested quite as far into that as they should do. And services like these can actually spin that file, spin those data which has been uploaded into the SaaS service for malware, spin it up inside a sandbox and see what it does. Is there perhaps a malicious macro hidden inside a Word document? Now, once these files have been detected, once they've been categorized as perhaps something that shouldn't be shared, there's loads of different options for remediation around this now. In particular, the file might be quarantined, so cut off access for both the user and the person that it might have been shared with. or perhaps even just going to the degree of giving the user, the owner of that file, a little notification via email or otherwise to say, hey, can you reconsider your decisions? Is this the right option for this file? Have you only shared this with the users that are absolutely necessary? So looking back at the home, of course, securing the home starts with an element of that user awareness training. So again, the SANS Institute and others have published documents about enabling users to choose strong passphrases for their home Wi-Fi as a nice and simple way of getting an extra bit of security, as well as ensuring that they are applying software updates in a timely manner on their home routers. But of course, that's still beyond a lot of our users. So how do we take enterprise grade networks and extend that back to the home? And a technology which has really come into its own again over the last couple of months with the COVID pandemic in mind, is actually delivering enterprise grade wireless routers and such like to homes. Now, these wireless access points then establish a secure tunnel, be it a VPN or a GRE tunnel, back to the enterprise, extending the enterprise network all the way to the home. And of course, once we've got this tunnel up, we can also then make use of enterprise grade encryption. So the same 8021X authentication policies you might have already, be they certificate or username and password based, can also be used inside the home, ensuring that our users aren't just hopping on unsecured networks with their mobile devices and giving them the very best experience from the Wi-Fi at home as well. Now we can take this and extend it also beyond just laptops. And we've seen a couple of instances now where these wireless access points have additional ports on them, and they can actually be used to enable the users to have access to their desk VoIP phones as well from home, further enhancing that user experience. And the same can be applied to all manner of devices. Printers is one that springs immediately to mind. But of course, perhaps if you've got some niche devices which the user needs to have access to from home that at the moment they don't, just because those devices don't have the ability to run a VPN, for instance, we can enable that just by plugging them in to the wireless access point's additional network ports. Now, hopefully this won't come to a bit of a surprise for you, but we're going to talk about credentials and authentications for the user. And yes, we're going to have a look at some additional options for MFA later on in the presentation. But we really are now at the stage where 8-character passwords are no longer enough. And those of you that I've worked with recently from the Cyber Essentials program in particular will know that that is still the minimum recommendation from a lot of those kind of formal certification bodies. But the reality is Microsoft and other organizations are now purporting the minimum being 14 characters or even more. In our instance at AN Security, we're going well beyond that as well. So how about we enable our users to choose strong passphrases instead of passwords? Let's cut out those complex requirements around uppercase, lowercase, numbers, special characters, and just ask the user to choose a password that is longer based upon words. And of course, there's a lot of password generators out there which can, or online services which you can use, but perhaps if you're mistrustful of those, there are plenty of tools which are of a very high quality, a very mature nature that you can now find on GitHub and other similar services, which will give you a website where you can send your users, host that internally. And a lot of these services actually take their word lists from online lists of dictionaries and such like to generate these passphrases for users. Now, the next step beyond that is, of course, if we are still enforcing complex passwords on our users, if they are still rotating their passwords on perhaps a seasonal basis, at the very least, let's test those passwords. Let's check that those passwords aren't in known lists of breached passwords. And again, this really comes down to some very high quality software that we can find on GitHub and other similar services again. So LiftNet password protection is something we've had a lot of success with over the last couple of months. And this is installed on your Active Directory domain controllers. And as the password is traversing the domain controller, it takes that information and compares it against the Have I Been Owned database. And if it sees that that password has been compromised before, it won't allow the user to progress with that password. And equally so, you can put your own password patterns in there as well. Company name, the names of the month, the names of the seasons are all very good options for that. Now, at this point, you might expect me to talk about multi-factor authentication, but the reality is multi-factor authentication adoption is still massively low. Apparently on a global scale, the statistics are around 57% adoption of MFA, but the reality is we're seeing as low as 20% adoption in some verticals, some business spaces. So we have to ask ourselves, what's the reason why? And the reality, of course, is it enhances the security posture, but it does nothing to improve the user's experience. We're asking them to enter a long password after entering their username, which of course might be an extended username as well. And once they've gone and done that, we're asking them to unlock their mobile phone, head into an app, get a TOTP key, accept a push notification, plug that key back into the website that they're logging into, click OK, and eventually they've logged in. So what if there were a better way? And this technology is already with us, just awareness of it needs to be enhanced. That's why I'm talking to you about it here now. And that's called passwordless authentication. And this is typically driven by a hardware security key. So the example that I've got for you here is logging into a Microsoft 365 service. And in the case of these security keys, it's a simple case of plug the hardware key into the machine, click sign in with a security key, enter the PIN for that security key. So that key or that PIN is specific to the key itself. And then press OK. You then finalize the process by touching the gold disc on that key. And this gold disc is that final step which proves that it is indeed a human being interacting with that authentication method. It's not someone that's gone and obtained that username and password from a breached list. It's an actual human interacting with it. And that's the user logged in. That's their sign-in process. So no request for a long username, no request for a long password, no request for an MFA token or key, which they have to get from an app on their phone. But what we get is the strongest possible security for our users. We've gone through an MFA process. They need to know the PIN. They need to have access to the hardware security key. And we've also taken that process and extended it further. We've assured that only the user who is interacting with that hardware key can actually unlock that credential. Now, there's a whole slew of other security protections built in here as well. But the one that I really like to point out is a service called Origin Binding. And this effectively ensures that that security token, that security key, can only be used with websites that it's been enrolled with. There is no way to extract that information from the key with a spoofed website. Now, this, of course, can take us with a nice consistent sign-in experience by extending this service and enabling it for users to actually log into their machines in the morning with these security keys as well. So if you're using a modern authentication provider, such as Microsoft Azure Active Directory, Duo, or Okta, you can actually enable these tools to have that security key inserted at the very beginning of the day. The user logs into their machine, they've authenticated their credentials, and that's them good to go for the entire course of the day. Now, there are a wide range of hardware options for here. The example that I provided there was the YubiKey 5, which is a simple USB Type A option, sticks out from the side of the laptop as well. But you've also got some options that you can see on the far right-hand side there for small devices that simply sit inside the USB port of a laptop. Again, making it very convenient for the user. Everything that they need to authenticate and sign into their machine is ready and good to go. And that's available in both USB Type A and USB Type C options. Now, for the longest time, I've been a good proponent of the YubiKeys by Yubico, but of course, other vendors have got these options as well. So if you're heavily invested in Google, Google have got their own hardware security keys, which can adopt this service as well. And there are even open source options available out there, again, for those who might be a little bit more security conscious and want to inspect the software that's running on these keys themselves. And the final point I'd like to make about this technology as well is those organizations which are not issuing mobile devices to their users, but still want to enable MFA for them in a strong security posture. Their main option really has been getting the users to use their own personal kit. But of course, you're going to get user pushback from that. I've seen it recently in a large education institution just down the road from me here, actually, where a lot of the users being, why should I be using my own personal device for an enterprise sign-in? Why should I be allowing this additional enterprise managed application on my phone? And of course, by using these hardware security keys, which are comparatively very low in cost compared to a mobile phone, of course, we can still extend that MFA service to our users. We can still give them the very best sign-in experience. So the final 2 points I'd like to touch on are around VPN services. And again, a couple of questions to ask yourselves. So first up, is the VPN an always on VPN? Is it a case of the moment the user is signed into their machine, their VPN is up and running? Or is it a case of you're asking the users to authenticate again? So not only have they logged into their machine, they're now responding to an MFA prompt on your VPN client, perhaps handled by an old-fashioned RSA key, for instance, and they're having to type in that code. Have we made a seamless experience? And by the appropriate configuration of the VPN client, be that we're using SAML or security certificates, we can give a very seamless experience to our users now. And it truly is a case of applying the right configurations to those VPN clients. Another matter to consider as well, I've seen myself working for previous organizations as well, is how the VPN client handles coffee shop Wi-Fi. Now, obviously, this isn't going to be something immediately relevant with a lot of the coffee shops closed, of course, or just taking takeout orders. But as and when our users do return to the city, as it were, is it a case of when that user hits a captive portal web page, they've got no option to progress? Is it a case of that VPN client is cutting off all browser access until it's up and running? So again, test these things with the users, ask them these questions. How seamlessly can they get into their VPN? Now, the final point I'd like to make here before handing back to Rich is having a look at alternative options for you delivering your VPN services. So of course, a lot of organizations have adopted SaaS services now. And here with the traditional style of VPN, we've got the problem where the user is tunneling their traffic over the internet back to your corporate environment. And then the internet connection is actually breaking out at your corporate building. And of course, this introduces additional latency into the connection, and this can be very noticeable on video conferencing services like Zoom and Microsoft Teams, of course. So the alternative to that is a service which is now emerging called SASE, or Secure Access Service Edge. And in this instance, we actually deploy the VPN service, the endpoint for that, into, or as close as we can, the same data centers where your users' information is, the same data centers where Office 365 is hosted, the same data centers where your Google Compute services might be hosted. And that way we've cut down the latency to these web services, massive degrees. We're just one hop perhaps away from Microsoft Teams. Now, this also gives us the same level of security and protections that we might have inside the building. We are effectively taking the enterprise firewall, whatever you've got, and extending that into a cloud service. So URL filtering and the likes of IDS and IPS services can all be enabled right there in the SaaS service. And of course, this still provides the same level of access for any internal services that you might have. Here, effectively, the SASE service establishes a further VPN tunnel back to the corporate environment. And if we see traffic destined perhaps for SMB shares or intranet websites that you're hosting inside the environment, we're going to send it down to that tunnel and back to the corporate business. So thank you very much for your time on those. I'm going to hand back to Rich now.
Thank you very much, James. So let me just click a few buttons, hope everything works. There we go. So always great to hear from you, James, particularly today when we had a few comms problems and I thought I'd never hear from you again. But what I wanted to do now is just wrap up this morning's session with a couple of takeaways. And, you know, we said at the start, we all know that times are pretty much tough for all industries. So we've worked hard with our vendor community. We're not tied to any particular vendor at all. It's always comes down to getting the right solution that meets the specific requirements. So that means that we can go and look at all of the offers that the vendors have and be able to pick the things that are free that we can go and use and recommend to our customers so that they can go and help improve their security posture. So what we've done is we've gone and thought long and hard about all the things that are out there. And I've got a couple of things that are recommendations here, and all the stuff that we're talking about here costs you nothing at all other than your time. So First thing that we'd recommend, James touched upon it earlier, let's do a phishing trial. And we can set this up for you with a partner called KnowBe4. Many of you might have come across them previously. We really like them. And essentially all you need to do is you need to provide us with a list of email addresses that you'd like us to include in the trial. We'll go and then tweak an email to make sure it actually gets through the firewall, because it's not the quality of the firewall we're checking here, it's the user behavior. Then we'll go and send it and we'll see what your users make of it. And at the end of the trial, you'll get a really comprehensive report, which provides you with a pretty decent assessment as to how your users have done. And it's also going to benchmark you against similar organizations in terms of your sector, but also your size as well. But the sorts of things we're looking for is, it's that evidence of the user behavior. What have they actually done once they've gone and received that email? Did they delete it immediately and let us know? Or did they go and open it? And if they did open it, did they click through? Did they engage in the page in any way, shape or form? And did they go so far as submitting their credentials? It's all really interesting stuff. And it provides us a great way of being able to understand the cybersecurity maturity of your users. So it's something we would definitely recommend doing. Very easy to achieve. What we're trying to find now when we're doing the KnowBe4 trial is, do we have a problem with email-borne threats? And, email-borne threats continue to be the biggest threat to any organization. And if it's something that you think that concerns you, and certainly if it's something that's proved through the KnowBe4 trial, then we'd recommend you go and have a look at the Barracuda Total Email Protection Toolset. It's a fantastic software suite, really great, particularly if you're using Office 365. But the other thing that we really like about Barracuda is the way that we've agreed with them that you can go about evaluating software. And I think between ourselves and Barracuda, we've agreed the absolutely lowest possible cost approach to evaluating security solutions. What we want to do is we want to learn about the organization, pick up as much information as we possibly can do, but actually understand whether it's the right solution. So the way that we do this is we go and have an initial workshop with yourselves and Barracuda to try and work out actually, is there a problem that we need to solve in the first place? Because many instances, actually, the problem we're trying to solve can be sorted just by simple process change. Now, if there is a problem, we then go and try and work out whether it's financially worth solving. So we chuck some numbers at it, we work out whether there's a business case, and there's almost an opportunity to sort of get out at that point. If it's not worth solving, then let's just deal with it. But, if it's a problem and it's worth solving, then we go and look at a range of scenarios that we consider. So we can see the total email protection bundle working absolutely in a real-time environment within your own constraints as well. So it's definitely worthwhile doing. You'll learn a lot about the organization and also be able to see whether this is the right sort of solution to solve that email threat that you've got. So the next thing we want to talk about is we can't talk about users without talking about MFA. And Okta, absolutely great MFA solution. It's been rolled out across many of our customers, but many of our customers have just done a simple proof of value exercise, which, it's a marketing word for, a trial. But the way that we do the Okta trial, you can learn a lot about the organization and also how your users work. So essentially what we do is we go and set up an Okta instance across a number of your applications, and we carefully pick which ones they'll be. We'll take you through the process. We'll also use this as a way of getting those users involved so we can go and help you understand the importance of user research, which you can then go and apply to other things that you do. But it's a really great way of being able to learn more about the organization and see how MFA might be able to work in terms of the different types of users you have within your business. Now, the final two things I just want to touch upon are from Palo Alto Networks. First one is Prisma Access. Now, James touched upon the whole cloud VPN right at the end of his section, but Prisma Access generally used to be something which was probably price prohibitive, but Palo have gone and changed that recently, and now we think that it's really something that is worthwhile looking into. If you're really interested in providing an improved user experience for your users by connecting them via a cloud VPN, then Prisma Access is fantastic. Now, what we've agreed with Paolo is we can arrange a fairly in-depth managed trial of the technology. We'll get direct support from Palo Alto Prisma Access engineers. And a number of these that we've won recently have probably been the best things that we've delivered on a learning trial basis. Every single instance has been a really worthwhile investment because it's got users involved, it's improved the experience. Not everybody is committed to moving to Prisma Access straight away, but they all see the value and are starting to build business cases to moving to that new way of working, because they can see how it's going to improve the productivity and security of those remote workers. Now, the final thing I want to talk about is Prisma SaaS from Palo Alto. This one's really simple, doesn't take a lot of time at all, but has got great value. And essentially what we do with the Prisma SaaS Managed Trial is we can plug in your cloud storage, whether that be Google, OneDrive, SharePoint, doesn't really matter. And then we go and provide you with a report on how much data has been shared with others, what type of information is being stored, along with information about any sort of special category data. You know, it's a great free service. It gets you to learn about your organization, gets you to learn about your estate. It's definitely worthwhile doing. So, you know, if any of these things are of any interest at all, then, you know, please just reach out to myself or your AN Security Account Manager. We can go and get things set up. December is generally a pretty good time to do this because if we do need vendor help, they tend to sort of slow down from around about the first week in. So if it's something you're interested in, just let us know. So I think that covers everything that we were planning on covering today, but there has been a couple of emails that have come in, and I've got one question as well. So James, are you able to hear me now?
Yeah, you crack on, Rich.
Oh, fantastic, that's brilliant. So let's have a look. So just to confirm, James, can passwordless be used for logging to Windows 10 computers?
Yep, so the standard sign-in experience that you get, so the username and password prompt that you see when you first turn on your Windows computer, with the right version of Windows 10 and the right settings set up in either Azure AD or your other MFA service, you can have that replaced with the hardware security key option effectively. So at that point, your user is logged in securely once they've had that MFA prompt. And once you've got that going, that's them set for the rest of the day. There's no need to see additional MFA prompts, of course. So it's makes for a very seamless user experience.
Okay, fantastic, thank you. So if I have a physical data center, should I use a cloud-based always-on VPN?
So here it really comes down to the services that you're consuming. If you've got a lot of those services hosted inside both your data center and also public services as well, then, if you're 50-50%, it's worth having a good analysis. It's worth really deep diving into it. The areas or the organizations that we see really taking advantage of those services is really going to be those that have got a lot of investment into SaaS, of course. If you're heavy into SaaS already, then looking at a SaaS delivered VPN is certainly the way to go as well.
Okay, excellent. Is MFA for Palo VPN an extra license, or is this something that's free to implement?
So you still need an MFA provider. So, Azure AD, Okta, Duo, anyone like that effectively. As when it comes to kind of Palo Alto VPNs, so Global Protect client, effectively you've got any option for authentication you want there. So what we typically target these days is those that want a truly seamless experience. We go with certificate-based authentication. So the machine provides a hardware certificate up to the VPN for it to then authenticate. And equally so, if they want a more user-driven experience, typically there we integrate with SAML now. So the Palo side, it's there. All the tools you need are good to go, even on the free versions of Global Protect. It really just comes down to what your authentication service is there.
Okay, excellent. Right, so let me just paraphrase this one. So what is the best way of working out if I should be using on-prem VPN or a cloud VPN?
Yeah, so that really comes down to doing that analysis of where is your traffic coming from. So is that a case of a lot of your traffic is going up to SaaS services? That this is where we look at the SaaS VPN. If a lot of your services is going to on-prem services, then perhaps still an on-prem VPN is the way to do it. But yeah, it's entirely down to just mapping out that traffic, seeing what's going where.
Okay, fantastic. So I've got one around theft of laptops. So we've been the victims of laptop theft. What mitigations against the theft of laptops from homes can we apply?
Yeah, so here again, it boils down to a little bit of user awareness and user training. So make sure at the end of the day, the laptop is put away somewhere where it's not going to be easily seen. And of course, this is just general good practice for not having things stolen from the home. But after that, when it comes down to a technical measure, it's really looking at how we ensure that that device is encrypted, that we have some method of tracking that device. If the device is encrypted, of course, we can say with reasonable certainty that if anything is stolen, that it's impossible to extract the information from it, of course. And there, I really kind of say, hey, make sure you've got some method of tracking that encryption, get the serial numbers recorded for all your machines somewhere, assign those serial numbers against the users so that if a machine is stolen, you can very quickly report to the police the serial number, and of course confirm to the ICO that the device was encrypted.
Okay, I've got a final one here around URL filtering. So what options have I got for delivering URL filtering to users who are working from home?
Yeah, so I've spoken with a couple of customers about this one quite recently now, actually. So it boils down to kind of one of three options, really. So an endpoint agent on the device which has URL filtering capabilities. There are a small number of vendors that can do this. And to be honest, none of them do it the same level of sophistication that kind of the network firewall vendors do. So after that, you're kind of looking at your standard VPN, tunnel everything back to the corporate environment. Or equally so, you're looking at a SASE delivered VPN. Some people might, of course, look at CASB products as well there, so cloud access security brokers. But yeah, that's really your three options. So endpoint client, VPN back to the office, or VPN as a SaaS service.
Excellent, fantastic. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time this morning. What we will do is we'll go and edit this recording just slightly so that we get rid of all of the nonsense at the start and make it available to view at a later time, and we'll certainly send you an email to make sure that you've got access to that. But like I said, if any of this any of these three bits and pieces are something of interest, then just drop me a line, our page at ansecurity.com, or reach out to your AN Security account manager and we'll be able to go and set something up for you. But please keep safe, and thank you so much for your time. We'll catch up with you again. Cheers.
Thank you all.